Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation. Before I go ahead and turn over the topic today to our presenters, I just wanted to cover a bit of housekeeping material for you all. We are recording today's session, so keep an eye on your inbox for a link to the recording that you can use either to review or to share with a colleague. We encourage you to do both. Also, if you have any questions or comments for our presenters today, feel free to direct them via the chat and or Q&A window. And we'll do our best to cover questions as time allows following the presentation. Also, there's going to be a few spots during the presentation where we'll have links. We will also post those in the chat window to have for you to click through. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn over today's presentation to Jack Smith and Jason Smith, who are going to take us away.
Thank you, Ray Swanson. So happy to be here today to present Mission Possible Windows 7 to 10 migration. And you know, we've done a similar one of these that we called Windows 10 to 10 migration. And you'll see why that the journey's not over, even though some deadlines are upon us for Windows 7. And that's where we'll speak to the biggest use case today in today's webinar. So happy that you're joining us and so happy to be over this winter break. A little cough and cold for myself, but glad to be on to a happy and healthy 2020. I am the head of product marketing, and I'm pleased to have with me from the field Jack Smith, no relation that we know of, one of our key system engineers, and one of our key system engineers that really has wrapped his mind around the migration challenges and the profile challenges. So we'll also be together in person next week. If any of you are at Citrix Summit, that's a partner show, but we'd be glad to visit with you there or this spring later at other shows that we're doing, such as Citrix Synergy. So a little bit about Liquidware before we jump in on the migration challenges. Liquidware provides adaptive workspace management. And what does that mean? You know, there's a lot of ways to do workspace management, to manage your profiles, to manage your user environment, to deliver your applications into an environment, or to provide user experience visibility. And this space is collectively known as workspace management. But we are the only vendor and the only partner of Citrix, VMware, Microsoft, Amazon, Nutanix to do this across all Windows desktops. So your Windows Enterprise probably looks a little bit like many of the solutions I just rattled off, physical, virtual, and cloud-based desktops. But we provide these solutions across virtual, cloud, and physical. So it's the tie that binds all your Windows desktops, whether you run Windows 7, 10, or multiple versions of 10, or server versions to deliver those to desktops. Liquidware solutions run across all those desktops. So once you manage them, you can easily switch those desktops and users from one desktop to the next. And you essentially have ended migrations or provided a zero migration, even across Windows disparate operating versions such as Windows 7 to 10, as we're speaking about today. We deliver user environment management that works across any way you deliver Windows, any Windows operating system included. You'll see a lot of that today. Flexible application attachments through our application layering engine called FlexApp. So it delivers this with integrated UEM features as well, because we believe firmly that the two are really linked, because the challenges of the two are linked. And then key monitoring diagnostics from a solution known as Stratos User Experience provides perhaps the widest windshield, both top to bottom and also left to right, for giving you key visibility of any Windows metric, any Windows desktop metric, down to a PID process level, and lets you define what the root cause of trending of UX in a negative direction is. Also helps you grow and scale your Windows deployments. Like if you're putting a toe in the water for virtualization or cloud-based desktops, let you grow and scale those by knowing what you have today and knowing what you are delivering through a proof of concept pilot and into production, by helping you grow and scale those deployments. Windows 7 deadline is now really among us. If we could change this dynamically, we are literally looking at minutes ticking to where the end of security updates end of your normal support for Windows 7. 5 days, which is why we're doing this webinar today, to remind people and give them their options from a third-party leader like Liquidware. This is the screenshot directly from Microsoft. It's ending literally next week. Will be the end of regular support for Windows 7. So what does that mean? That means you're going to be at risk immediately for security updates. That means that application vendors many of them will stop developing for Windows 7. It doesn't mean, of course, that Windows 7 won't work in your enterprise. It means that you start to be at risk right away. And I wrote a blog on this yesterday, that you need a safety net and you need a way to get off of Windows 7 or to look at extending Windows 7 affordably. And we're going to talk about that. But if you do the straightforward physical desktop extended support options, if you really look at what those are, it's expensive to stay on Windows 7 starting next week. Expensive in the way that if you want to remain, your desktops remain secure, remain supported going forward. If you want to do this officially, you'll need to pay. And you'll need to pay starting next week, $25 per machine. And this is can be very terribly expensive. If you look at the next tier up, it's $50 per machine a year from now. And then if you look at 2 years from now in 2022, you're looking at $100 per machine. And that's if you're just on enterprise. If you're on Pro, which many of you may be, Windows 7 Pro, you're looking at doubled cost of that. And so it's very expensive to stay on. And this source comes directly from Microsoft and from an industry publication known as TechSpot. There is a way that you can remain on Windows 7 and deliver those desktops. Maybe you need to stay on there because you've got applications that solely work better with Windows 7, or that your end user experience you feel like is better with Windows 7. Microsoft with WVD, that stands for Windows Virtual Desktop, and it's running desktops basically in the cloud in their ecosystem. Either running them with a pure WVD or a native WVD experience, and that is end-to-end Microsoft, no third-party vendors like Citrix or VMware needed. Or you're running Citrix or VMware and you're leveraging some of your WVD entitlements. You're eligible to do this if you're running these entitlements. One of the entitlements is to be able to run Windows 7 and not have to pay these costs that we showed you here on this screen if you're running them in a WVD environment. So Liquidware is a verified Microsoft partner to deliver user environment management in a WVD environment, application layering, and monitoring and diagnostics. We're an inaugural partner a couple of years ago, and still working very closely with Microsoft WVD to run in WVD environments. And what that means is that also, if you are running Liquidware in your physical environment today or your virtual environment today, and you want to go to WVD and start using those entitlements, the extension, you can literally log off of one desktop with our Profile Unity solution. You'll see a demo of that later today in today's webinar, and log on to the new experience of WVD and have zero user downtime. So we provide the migration engine for you to be able to do that as long as you're hitting the same domain. You're going to have, and some more storage, you're going to have the profile and everything show up, especially if you're leveraging us to do cloud staging. That is, saving your user profile, your applications over, and then getting them up to a shared location and being able to pull them right back down at the next login. You'll see a demo of that today. Ray Swanson, I want to ask you, if there's questions that come in that are pertinent at any time, feel free to ask those, from the chat window. We like to encourage participation in there. I see a blinking icon right now. I'm not going to check it. Ray will check it and let us know if there's pertinent questions that we can entertain at any time during today's presentation. So we highly encourage you to do that. Love for the questions to come in. It breaks up the rhythm a little bit and makes it far more interesting. So a big move from Windows 7 to Windows 10 obviously is upon us, but let's look at right now, where is the industry? So there's different metrics that you can look at to gather this. Corporations and enterprises may be even ahead of what I'm about to talk about on this slide. This is industry metrics. It's actually worldwide metrics from Net Market Share that looks at what browsers people are using. It'll actually report the operating system from general internet web traffic. So this takes into account the home market as well. And that's what I'm saying. Corporations may be even further ahead of this. If we look at where we were in a year ago, we were at about half and half market share, with Windows 7 being in orange here and Windows 10 being in blue. There's other operating systems involved, obviously, in the world, but those are the two major market shares of people browsing the web. And if we look at this, you'll see that even though we were neck and neck about a year ago, there was quite the divergence that happened. And now worldwide, we're at greater than 50% market share. This includes the home market for Windows 10, and Windows 7 is steadily decreasing. Now, again, a lot of this Windows 7 may be in the home market, and maybe you're further along with your transition to Windows 10 or other operating systems than this shows, but we have to start somewhere, and it's a very interesting way to look. So if you are still on Windows 7, don't be afraid, because you're not that far behind, even though end of support is upon us. But you need your options laid out there, and that's what we're doing today. But Windows 10, as you can tell, has grown significantly in the last year and will continue to grow, and the spread will continue to be upon us. As I said, we pulled this, and this is metrics that ended in December, so just a week ago. Let's talk about the top 3 considerations for a Windows 10 migration, and really the top 3 considerations for any migration to a new way to deliver Windows, whether it be just operating system or moving to a cloud-based desktop. You need to take care of the fact that you are moving users over, users that produce things with their desktop. And remember that many people on this webinar today are a consulting partner, or they are Windows customers themselves. You need to remember that who is the customer for you? It is the end user. That's why you have your job. That's why Liquidware is in business, because there are people that actually use Windows desktops. We need to make this as frictionless as possible. What applications are they using? So this is the center of how they produce things on their desktop. A lot of these are web-based now, but there are so many applications still that they produce things locally on desktops, and you need to take into account, how they're accessing that OS, the hardware, and you need to control cost there in this. Can you repurpose desktops, for example, ensure compatibility among applications, and ensure again that productivity is not hampered. Let's start with users. They're your most important customer, as I spoke about a moment ago. How can you capture the goodwill that they've created on their machines in the past to ensure that they are seamlessly productive going forward? Which users are good candidates to migrate first? You've probably already started that since Windows 10 has become so popular and in demand. But if you haven't, you need to look at which ones you should migrate first. Or if you're looking at the remaining Windows 7 desktops, what's a good starting point? How can you protect that user goodwill, things they produced and maybe saved to their desktops, and they didn't adhere to saving to the place that you've backed up, on the network for a file share, or maybe they didn't adhere to saving it to a cloud vendor that they're supposed to do, and maybe they save things to their hard drive, and you want to make sure that those are accurate, kept secure, and that you've taken an inventory of what that is and either automated that, moved it over. How can you keep users productive? Is there a way to do a zero downtime? Literally, like even during the week, they log off on a Thursday and they come back in tomorrow morning, they log in and they have a new desktop and they're productive. How can you make that occur where there's actually zero downtime, even no weekend that you have to work? Is there a better way to handle user profiles and the environment in order to lessen the management so you don't have this problem going forward? We'll talk about this, and Jack will speak about, once you move from Windows 7 to 10, it's not over, as I alluded to earlier. How can you make sure that something doesn't happen in the future to where profiles are broken again, or data is not kept in the right place, to where you can continue and make this frictionless going forward? And how do you handle large amounts of data, like Office 365 cached mails that may be, personal PST files and things like that, and make those available to where they have no user interruption, because that is the repository for better or worse, for a lot of organizations, that things are kept just as email attachments and not elsewhere. Pause for a minute, Ray, see if there's any questions that may have come in that are pertinent to things that we've covered so far.
I don't see anything just yet, so we'll keep an eye out for that. So a reminder, if you do have questions, either you can put them via the question or the chat window.
Yep, and you can give us shout outs at any time too at Liquidware, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Watching a really interesting webinar, we love to see those, and we will gladly give you a follow and a follow back. So again, Twitter, it's easy to find us. We're at Liquidware. Easy to find us on LinkedIn. Okay, one thing you need to acknowledge is that user profiles and data are not dynamic, especially between Windows 7 and 10, and even versions of 10. Windows OS changes break profiles, and we'll get into the details of that in a moment. Profile loss can cause a lack of productivity, and this, you may have seen this in a profile corruption, like a half-written profile, and you had to reset a user's profile, and you don't get to see how that causes and hampers the user production. But for the next week, they are recreating things as simple as dictionaries, spell checkers. They're recreating things like Outlook signatures, and possibly even user authored data that was stored in a user profile that should have never been stored there in the first place. Speaking of user authored data, it's critical. You need to make sure that my documents and things like that have been harvested and you've taken those into an account. And USMT, user state migration tool from Microsoft, and copy and paste methods, you should acknowledge that those are largely inefficient and they are a pain to scale those. And maybe many of you have and scripted solutions to be able to do that, but you'll see that there's an easier way today. Our solution, Profile Unity, and that's when we get into here's the commercial aspect, right? We've told you the challenges, but really here's a solution right in front of you, and you can do things without Profile Unity. Obviously, backup things, try to make profiles work, try to extrapolate data is a mess. You've probably done it even on your own individual desktop in years past or recently, and it is a mess. And you're doing that at scale, it's hard to do. Profile Unity does make profiles work at scale. It solves the user authored data challenge. And let's just tick through those. So user profiles and data become dynamic when you're managing the user. You have them under management. You can stage these, cloud stage these to places like Azure or Amazon or Google, where they're pulled back down at every login or synced up. Profiles and the operating system become compatible to work both forward and backward. So if there's multiple desktops they log on to, the profile, the key pieces of it will work, and users are kept productive. User authored data is redirected to a file server or to a cloud staged area, so it's ready to go for the new desktop. Prior to the user authored data redirection, we can harvest off things like My Documents and put those in the places that you prefer, that are backed up, that are kept dynamic, and not affect user productivity. With Microsoft's own solutions, there's a way to do that at user login, but it often fails, and it's only done at user login and holds off the user login in for sometimes minutes to hours and would fail. With Profile Unity, these things happen in the background, and then we do another synchronization at the next login to make sure anything they actually produced or started is also carried over, and then we flip on the redirection to the new location. And then, as I said earlier, you end migrations. It's actually a zero migration. The user's never down and is seamless and frictionless going forward. So when you run into this challenge again, and you will, because Windows 10 was supposed to be the one OS to rule them all. I read a story this week. The headline said, "A look at Windows 11." And I was like, what the heck? They weren't supposed to rename this, right? And it turns out that someone was just like theoretically taking a look at what Windows 11 would look like if Microsoft actually rolled out a Windows 11, but that's indeed possible. Windows 10, these headlines are old now. It's supposed to be the one OS to rule them all. Look at that, from January of 2015. Even Windows Phone, if you remember that, was supposed to be Windows 10. Now there's no longer even such a thing as a Windows Phone, at least not supported. it was supposed to be the one core OS to rule them all, and we've seen that not really come to full fruition. What we have seen is that the Windows 10 name has continued for the last several iterations of the OS, and there's been large changes in those. Jack will get to some of those in a moment, but this is a little tongue-in-cheek. Windows 10 being the one OS to rule them all really has not really happened except in name. At this point, I want to reintroduce Jack Smith. He is known in the trenches as a hero to many of our customers for making a lot of this magic happen, and he truly knows these challenges at a very, very innate level. So, Jack, could you talk about some of these profile changes we've experienced since XP Forward?
Absolutely. So everybody knows the basics of V1, V2. We've had those for years, since XP to Windows 7. Windows 8 was generally skipped in most enterprise industries as a V3, V4, except for the exception of Windows 2012 servers, which are V3, V4 profile format types. With Windows 10 being introduced in 2015, it actually introduced a V5 profile format type, which kind of evolved into another 1511 V5 profile format type. With the advent of the 1607 operating system, which some folks might know as Windows 2016 OS, as well as maybe a 26 or a Windows 10 LTSB, that is a V6 profile format type. Now, this is where things started to get a little weird with Microsoft, because the profile format name did not change. However, under the hood, the profile was evolving on and on and on to the next thing. And the main reason why on the screen you see a V6.1, V6.2, V6.3 is because Microsoft did not actually officially change it to a V7, V8, V9 profile format type. They kept the V6 moniker for the profile itself. Now, what ultimately changed down the line wasn't necessarily the core operating system in the registry. That part was pretty solid. What changed under the hood, however, were all the modern apps. And as you start to go from 17 to 18 to 19, and now soon the 20H1 releases of Windows 10, those modern apps evolve. So being able to have something that maybe kind of ignores the modern app or picks up the pertinent items of the modern app and loads that down into the operating system, as well as all of the components of the profile registry components itself, and or the app data roaming and maybe even a subset of the app data local components and pieces of the operating system become important. So being able to have that universal profile format to allow you not only go up the operating system chain, but back becomes vitally important, because we're not doing migrations where on Sunday everybody upgrades to the latest build of the operating system and then you move up, because there is no going back. In fact, in the fall of 2018, Microsoft pretty much wrote this headline for me. If you guys remember, when 1809 released, it started deleting operating systems. It started blowing up OSs. So if you can imagine, if you did a VDI type migration of, okay, we're going to move to 1809 now, everybody logs in and things just start to get blown up. Where was your backup? There wasn't one, right? Well, with Profile Unity, I would still have that profile. I could still move back to 1709 until the next updates of 1809 come out, or whatever that happens to be. So being able to go back and forth doesn't sound important until you run into an 1809 type incident, and then you go, gosh, I wish I could have gone back and forth.
It's good data. It's easy to, I'm about to say something that may be obvious to everybody, but I know it wasn't to everybody, because a couple years ago I was like, how do I keep up with these naming conventions? It's now more straightforward, but the two first digits indicate the year that this version was introduced, and the second two are the month. And I didn't realize that for the longest time. And I spoke to people out in the trenches at shows, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I knew what 1709 or 1809 was, but that really never occurred to me either. So they match up with the year that these were introduced and the month.
Yeah, Microsoft is actually changing the naming structure again for this year. It's still going to be 0309, but they're not necessarily calling it that. Now they're calling it 20H1 and 20H2 for first half and second half of the year.
Yep, it seems obvious once we state it, doesn't it? But I really, truly I was like, how did I not catch that early on? But it's interesting to see that really 1507 in this area was the first viable for enterprise. Wouldn't you agree? About this time, this is when people really started rolling it out in 2015.
Yes, yeah, or 1511. Probably some of the worst builds of Windows 10 that I've ever experienced.
Yeah. And now we're over 5 years into enterprise rollout of Windows 10.
Certainly a lot more stable.
Well, and many of us are old enough to know that Windows 7 actually kind of was supposed to coincide with 2007. I don't think it did exactly, but there used to be a thing such as a Windows 2003 server, for example, and things like that. And we still call the server versions, related to dates. But as you can tell, that was Windows 10 was supposed to coincide with 2010, and it never really did. It was late to market.
That's the reason why they're going with H1 and H2 monikers, because they keep missing the third month of the year and the ninth month of the year. In fact, I believe 1809 was released somewhere around December.
Well,
November, December timeframe. So they missed it by a month or two.
So it's still, yeah. I mean, we know that our own releases get delayed for various reasons. It's software. So I'm not faulting Microsoft in any way. It's just
no,
nature of the business.
Not at all.
Here's a little more detail, Jack, if you didn't cover that on the previous.
Yep. So this actually does show that there are expirations behind these various different builds, right? You can see when the different builds have come out. I've clipped off everything pretty much 1703 prior, because those are expired operating system builds, with the exception of LTSB builds. You'll see that on our second slide here after this. But the thing is the builds come out. You are on various different versions of the operating systems, and the versions eventually do expire off. If you Let's move on to the next slide here, you'll see that even more clearly. The H1 releases of the operating systems are as good as 18 months, and the H2 releases are as good as 30 months, right? So hopefully they've worked out the kinks of the build for that particular year. But a 2.5 year life cycle of an operating system in IT is a blink, right? You're going to probably do 6 months of validation testing of an operating system before you even roll it out to your users, which gives you about 2-ish years of life on that one, if you aren't already into a year and a half down doing another 6-month validation testing of the next operating system that comes down the line. So in essence, you are actually probably going to be doing an update of the operating system every year or year and a half, just to keep up with the cadence that is the Microsoft Windows 10 builds. Now, a lot of people like to go down the route and say, well, I don't have that problem. I do LTSB, LTSC, or honestly, whatever Microsoft feels like calling it this week, the long-term builds. And that can solve some problems, but it can also cause some problems as well. But the problems that it obviously solves is now I don't have to really worry about the feature releases of the operating system, and turn also the dot version, if you will, of the profile. That's going to stay pretty static. But Microsoft has a funny way of getting you, and they always tend to. For example, the previous LTSB was or may no longer be compatible with the latest version of Office 365. So if you wanted to use the 2019 version of 365 because you want to be on current code base, because there's some feature sets around maybe OneDrive, if you're a OneDrive customer, you can't. It is not supported because that feature set was released in the 17 series and higher. You may have to move on to the 1809 LTSC releases, upgrade forced, and that was 2 years, maybe 3 years. No, actually it was 2 years. So Microsoft isn't going to let you kind of sit back on an operating system for the next 14, 15 years like they did with XP and Windows 7. You are eventually going to be forced onto the next build of the operating system one way or another, because there's a new feature, there's a new security enhancement, there's something in the operating system that you'll go, oh, it would be nice, that would save us storage, that would be beneficial to our user group. Time to upgrade.
Jack, you mentioned modern apps. So
Yes.
there was a related question that came in that the customer, I don't believe they're a current customer of ours, by the way. So they're finding that modern apps tend to break when using a mandatory profile in their VDI environment.
They do.
Is there any way that Profile Unity can help with this?
Yeah. So that's kind of the big gotcha with mandatory profiles, is that it is basically like copying the entirety of an already set up user. Well, the problem is that modern apps are a per user entity. So that's why those break, is that you're kind of more or less bringing in the modern apps as admin, and then they kind of throw up on themselves, if you will, because they don't know what to do. Not to mention, a mandatory profile made a lot of sense in Windows 7, Windows XP days, maybe in 2003, 8, and 12-ish. Let's go with 12-ish. And the reason why those were good was because, honestly, a lot of times they were something around the lines of, 30 meg, 50 meg in size, maybe 100 on the high side. Now, if you go look at that mandatory profile now, I can bet you it's somewhere around 150 to 300 meg, which means you are now loading a 300 meg file into the operating system every single time you log in, and then on the high side, of course, versus if you were to just use the default profile that's sitting in the C drive. That default profile is something along the lines of 3.5 meg. It's tiny, right? And the reason why you can go down that route is that you do the 3.5 meg default profile, which then it kicks off a process called modern. I'm blanking on the name here. I think app readiness. Sorry, application readiness. Application readiness is basically the modern app kind of manifest engine, processes the modern applications into the guest operating system. You kind of set the settings around those applications so you can retain your settings for your calculators and all those fun things, and you log into the operating system. But the thing is that those modern apps kind of reload themselves every single time. Now, is there a way to get around this? Unfortunately, no. Even with profile disks, the app readiness services is going to run to do a verification of the application within the attached volume. So Microsoft kind of made their own mess when it came to modern applications, and they're continuing to go down that route with more and more modern applications in the guest operating system. And that was the big key factor, is if I try to go up, I'm broken. So those man profiles basically might have to be updated every time they put out a feature release, because there's a good chance that those modern applications have been updated with the next patch release. And if the patch release of what's sitting in the C drive is not equivalent to the patch release of what is in your mandatory profile, you now have a broken profile, which is exactly the same problem you run into when you go up an operating system and then you try to go back with like a profile disk or maintaining any of those, like a persistent workstation or whatever. You try to go backwards, they all fall apart.
That's good input, and hopefully we gave some guidance on that. If not, the customer, feel free to reach out to us afterwards, and also with our support, see if we can give you further consulting on the matter. I'm going to talk a little bit about how when you put Profile Unity in, there's a guided configuration. So you would think that you need to do all this diagnoses to remediate and see what you had today, but Profile Unity is really good at capturing two really key areas of the Windows OS to make sure you have what you need to hydrate, to populate your new desktop when the user logs on. So the guided configuration is very much when you install it initially, is a click next, 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 and finish, and it puts in a baseline for what we know are the core areas where the profile, the user space is saved, that will be compatible going forward and remain compatible going backwards. It will capture that. harvest it off. At first, log off is the default time that it logs, that it will save it to either a file share or the network, and then it will be ready immediately to be pulled back in at the very next login, even across operating system versions. So the profile is made compatible, but we also take care of user authored data, which is what you see here. Screenshot, we will put in folder redirections if they're not already there, based on the parameters that where you tell us to redirect to the folder. And we will redirect those to a file share, for example, and we can also redirect them to a place where OneDrive and cloud services like that can pick them up and sync them going forward. So we can make sure that they're in those right and correct locations. As you see here where it says existing files, we've specified what to do with that, and that's a default action in most of the guided configurations. It will sync that to the new location. It does it in the background, and it can throttle it, as you see here, because you can imagine many users logging in at once. You want to throttle that to something that's decently fast, but yet doesn't cripple your entire network by moving a lot of data across your pipe, to get it there. You can exclude things like .mp3 files or movies or things that they probably weren't supposed to be saving. Sometimes that may be their job, maybe not be their job to have those file types in there. So you can exclude large file types that that probably are not going to be needed going forward, and that will sync up in the background. That synchronization engine kicks in the background, starts moving things over, and we'll set a flag in our product under the inventory tab. It's grayed out because it's not the active area of the screenshot, but the inventory tab, it reports back once you have inventory turned on as a feature set, and we'll tell you when Susie in accounting has finished their My Documents migration. So the profile is immediate. It is harvested at log off and compressed to save time, and only like a smart profile is harvested off. We do not grab cached areas unless you want those to go across. Most of the time those are bloated, and we'll leave those behind with our rule sets it provides a smart profile, and we inject that at the next login, and then user authored data also comes along, and we'll set a flag when that has occurred. So guided configurations automate the process, gets that across, and handles that. Now, how would you handle large profiles? Now, there are ways that can work with that process that I just spoke about. It's a hived, compressed profile that makes things available. It's very manageable. There's really not much else like it in the industry that works across all Windows desktops, not just a Citrix or not just a VMware desktops, but all desktops as a Hive profile. But what about large profiles? We're talking about like email data and things like that, PST files, all kinds of things like that. And we have a solution known as Profile Disk that works in tandem with Profile Unity's portability, which I just described. And it gives you the best of both worlds. There's also a solution from Microsoft from the FS Logics acquisition that provides this too. It doesn't, this technology alone, Profile Disk or FS Logics, doesn't give you granular profile management. It does not give you the ability to work across multiple operating systems. They're tied to an operating system version in most cases, but we work with those technologies to bring those down. And in doing so, we can handle very large profiles that we exclude from the portability way that I described a moment ago, to bringing those in to the operating system and make them work. For example, PST files can be handled this way. Office 365 works great. The example here is in cached mode, where it's saved a month's worth of data and is brought in. So our own profile disk provides that very fast login for huge amounts of data, like the email cache if you wish, or we can work with FS Logics, and then Profile Unity's portability engine gives you that cross OS compatibility. So you now see why that's the best of both worlds. You can easily handle profiles that are over a gigabyte in size with Profile Disk. You can have one for Windows 7, for example. You can have a profile disk for Windows 10, and you can have our portability that I first described, a Profile Hive, that will tie the two together. That makes it a very seamless and zero downtime. All right, moving on. Applications. How do you know what you've got today so you can provide those applications that users need for productivity for their new desktop? How can you get a complete inventory of applications? How do you know which applications are going to be compatible with a new operating system version? And is there a better way to handle application delivery in the future so you can reduce the management workload, your workload, for making sure applications are available? And further application challenges is that they're not always compatible with the operating system that you're moving to. Windows 7 applications are not always compatible with Windows 10. Sometimes, and most of the time they are, but older applications may not be. They might not be compatible with delivering in a virtual or server-based computing environment. And now's the time to rethink your application delivery. And that's why you're seeing a lot of things in the news about, revisiting ways you're delivering applications. Should you be doing in a container-based approach through AppV, through VMware ThinApp, MSIX App Attach, or through application layering, which can work across operating system versions, has a high degree of compatibility for the types of applications that it can deliver, and that is our own Flex App application attachment and delivery can provide you with benefits there. Now, I'd like to speak, or let Jack speak on Stratosphere and how we can help you learn what you have today. Talk about this report from Stratosphere. Jack?
Thank you. So when you're doing any sort of application packaging or assessments against what your environment looks like, you kind of have to know what you are using, right? For things like SCCM, it's very easy to determine what is installed, and that can be a very important question to answer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, understanding what your users are in fact using makes a bit more sense than trying to uh, uh, just package up whatever applications the application owners happen to be. And this can help in a couple different ways. One, this can help you just determine what the low-hanging fruit is and say, yeah, well, everybody in my environment uses Chrome and FileZilla and Greenshot, so those are going to probably be the ones that we nail down first, versus maybe I've got one person who's using the Bentley Connect client for some reason, right? That may not necessarily be a very high priority application for you to go and package up because, well, you've got one person that is in fact actually using it. So this report here is kind of meant to help you, one, identify applications that you have in your environment, two, applications that are installed in your environment, three, applications that are used in your environment, and then we try to help you identify good candidates for Flex App, things that are not installed in App Data Local, things that are not part of the operating system like Edge or Explorer. We look for that and put kind of a little knowledge around that and say, hey, if there's a certain percentage of user base that is actually in fact using this application, these are the ones we're going to target first. Everything else is just going to be kind of a non-issue. So that is what the Stratosphere product is kind of meant to help you with, especially in that initial onset of what do we do first? What applications are we going to in fact either maybe put in the base because of complexity, or B, might be really good candidates for FlexApp?
Thanks, Jack. And you may be wondering, where do you get this view in Stratosphere? Well, Stratosphere is compatible with a lot of reporting tools such as Power BI from Microsoft, and this actually is Stratosphere data flowing into Power BI if you're curious. So Jack, if you want us to talk about how you ID applications for possible virtualization?
Sure. So virtualization is a bit different than FlexApp. FlexApp is actually not technically virtualization in the same sense of like a ThinApp, AppV, or MSIX. Those are more containerized applications that live in a bubble. And there's been pretty much a pretty good general industry standard across what applications are compatible with those types of things and what things to look out for. For example, things that are isolated within the bubble tend to not work really well with device drivers or services, right? Because those are kind of technically, well, they are very much part of the operating system. And if they are in a bubble, they're not part of the operating system. So looking for, does the application in fact have a service? Does it install drivers? Does it have shell extensions? Does it use DCOMs, which is a big factor in AppV worlds? If the answer is yes to a lot of these, that might be a high complexity. Now, we're not saying it's impossible. We're just saying that it's going to be hard. And you may not want to necessarily tackle that. You may want to focus on something around the lines of a low or medium complexity application that might be something a little more simple, like a Notepad++. It's simple. It doesn't do driver services, DCOMs, it's a folder, it's small, done.
Great, thanks, Jack.
Yep.
And then one of the third challenges you need to look at is your hardware. How can you get a complete inventory of the devices that you have in use today? After all, some of them might be able to run Windows 10 and run it very well. How can you determine your hardware compatibility with Windows 10? And should you move some of the workspaces to virtual platforms? So you need to diagnose some of that. And how do you get a not just a user profile, but a profile, like a user profile, how you using this machine, how can you gather information like that, how much storage is used and things like that. And Stratosphere can be key in there too. So here we have a machine configuration summary. Jack, if you want to touch on the highlights of this one. Jack, if you'd like to touch on the highlights of this one.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So looking at this, what you're seeing is the different model informations, right? The serial number information, the BIOS vendor's version number, stuff that might be pertinent to a physical workstation, right? Because I need to know, did I turn on TPM? What is the vendor for that one? Is there specific items within there that we need to actually, in fact, have to shore up our security? Maybe I need to know, a certain serial number of a workstation that checked into our system that I forgot to add an asset tag on or isn't in our system for some reason or another. So you can actually pull these machine-based components and pieces of the environment to identify if even your lowest BIOS component is up to the certain thresholds or requirements for your latest security audit.
It's great. So we've found a lot of things, and we have reports that show how much the machines are being used and things like that, how active they are. So we've saved hospitals a lot of money by turning off, identifying even dormant machines, saying no one ever uses this machine, no one's used this machine for 3 weeks, and turning them off and recycling them, in more ways than one, right? So we've saved many organizations money on getting a handle on their hardware sprawl. This is a look at the storage sizing that you might want to get a view of before you move over to a new desktop. Briefly, if you want to cover this one, Jack.
Sure. So this is actually kind of a 5,000-pound gorilla in the room. How much data am I moving? And it's one thing when it's document data or desktop data. That is partly of the conversation, and most people kind of already have a general idea of what the documents, desktop, favorites, all that fun stuff that everybody moves to the network share is. Another thing, however, that tends to be overlooked is how large is my app data roaming folder and how large is my app data local folder, which is unfortunately not represented on the screen here. Why is that important? Well, if you look into technologies like a profile disk, or you're looking into technologies like ours and you want to have a pretty decent idea of like how big is the app data roaming directory, and then maybe put a 10-to-1 ratio on compression on that one, or on the flip side with a profile disk, how large is this profile disk ultimately going to be, right? Running that report against your just simply an app data local directory answers that question of, you go, okay, we thought it was 5 gig, and we find out that most of our users are using anywhere between 8 to 10, maybe 15 gig on their app data local directory. And with a profile disk, it does not care. It's the whole thing. So you may not, in fact, have the space for that, and you might maybe consider something along the lines of, well, we need to redirect the OST. OST is 2 gig. We don't need the rest of the stuff. Maybe we can shrink down the profile, use a mixture of an OST virtual volume and maybe portability to handle the profile and bring our footprint down, or at least be cognizant that there are parts of the profile that you may not in fact need, and maybe eliminate them as part of your profile disks in general.
Right. We'll go over that with most customers with expert like Jack in the field before you really embark on your movement. So FlexApp can solve application delivery, obviously. And by the way, we see some questions coming in. We're going to get through a few more slides, and then we'll entertain the questions. Thank you, and we love the questions, so don't mean to curtail any of those. But FlexApp is an application attachment process. I hesitate to even call it layering sometimes, and Jack's of the same mind, because there's been some products out in the market that have given layering a bad name, but you can really think about a FlexApp application as attached from a VHD. Usually, VMDKs are also supported on the network, and they work across multiple OS versions. So if you're running FlexApp today with Windows 7, there's a great chance you won't have to repackage anything. Those applications usually work well with Windows 10 and multiple versions of Windows 10. So it doesn't break your packages like it does with some of the other solutions on the market when you're containerizing packages. You can reduce the number of desktop images and server images that you're deploying, and that's a key way with FlexApp. You can make for generic Citrix servers, for example, or WVD multi-session 10 servers, and you can deliver applications across to specific users. So we have session isolation in there that isolates one user can't see the applications and the user has. So when you can greatly reduce your Citrix server farms or your WVD farms in doing this, and then delivering out the applications on a per user basis. FlexApp applications have a high degree of compatibility over and above even late breaking things like MSIX. We work well with MSIX applications, but our degree of compatibility is much higher for drivers and services and things like that. FlexApp supports well-managed and well-connected desktops. So it's not a laptop type of solution today, although most of our other solutions can run on laptops, but it's for well-connected and well-managed machines. For example, when you move to Windows 10, it's a great time to think about delivering applications via FlexApp. It complements strategies from Microsoft, such as their AppV and their MSIX technologies, and VMware ThinApp, because ThinApp provides a totally different way for delivering an application in an isolated, fully isolated format, whereas we have a high degree of compatibility with FlexApp, and we support application strategies that are compatible with other vendors as well. So putting it all together, Windows 10 migrations, what would make for a seamless approach? We surveyed our own customers, and they liked what they saw, and they liked the way that Profile Unity automated things. If you look at an ROI calculation, and I'll briefly cover these slides so we don't bore you to death with a commercial here, but really we were saving for a lot of organizations in the neighborhood of at least 2 hours per desktop, as you see here. And for some of them, we even saved, greater than 4 to 5 to 10 hours per desktop. And if you look at the overall time saved in moving to a new OS, we saved, for the majority of applications, we saved at least 4 months in the process. And for some organizations, even greater than that. So ensuring a Windows 10 migration, we talked about today, assess what you've got for legacy desktops, and you can do that with Stratosphere. Design the right environment, keep that in mind. Leave no mission critical data behind, whether it's user profile or harvesting user authored data, to make sure that those are available at the very next desktop with zero user downtime. Preparing your base image and have your application strategy nailed down for the way that you're going to roll out your applications. Have a good base image, have application layering or application attachment in mind, or through traditional installs through SCCM or other means. Ensuring that your user data is available. You've staged it maybe in a cloud staging area, and we provide a strategy for doing that to the major 3 clouds, and making sure that it is available for the user to log in at next login and have that available. So we provide that compatibility with saving and harvesting off user author data, again, for services like OneDrive, Amazon WorkDocs, even Dropbox, where they can pick up and they can sync those areas. User author data, we've made sure that it's backed up and available, and that we monitor and measure the experience, not only through our inventory and Profile Unity, knowing when those things are moved across, but also monitoring the user experience with Stratosphere. And you can do a lot of these things through manual processes, but using our suite of solutions, you can indeed have a seamless migration. When you compare us to other processes like User State Migration Tool and others, our own customer base has found that we're 95% more effective, whether good, excellent, or superior to those processes, 95% better than things like User State Migration Tool. The speed at which we do that, you see that we're greater in that area. The reliability, we're at least 92% greater. Reporting and the processes of tracking that, we're 92% better in the ease of use, obviously with our guided configurations and easy to see and easy to use data, and zero friction for the end user. Let's show a demo real quick, how you get from Windows 7 from the end user perspective to Windows 10. I've got a Windows 7 desktop here. that we're logged into, and you'll see that I even have many applications that are available here. And I'm going to create some user persistency on this desktop, even changing out the desktop wallpaper. Now, desktop wallpaper can be unreliable, but if you do corporate standards and push those out through setting that with Profile Unity, we can make those available. I've got a browser here, and we've got Internet Explorer, for example, and we're going to put some bookmarks in here. We're creating user persistency in here. This user's used applications. They've created user persistency. Foxit Reader, they're going to leverage that. By the way, that's an attached application through FlexApp. Now through the user profile, we'll create and save things like the dictionaries and things like that. We're enabling spell check or disabling spell check here, and those things like that are small and that are the help for user productivity, not only for that, but for full versions of Microsoft Office and others, we make those occur. Speaking of Microsoft Office, we've got the user logged in with a very large profile, and they've got cached down 132,000 messages in there, and those items are available to come down from the cloud and then cached into the local system. We have over a month's worth of data, and you'll see that the indexing has already fully occurred in here, and the user is fully productive in their current Windows 7 desktop. So even a very large profile with what's cached in there. We're going to leverage our profile disk. We could equally leverage FSLogix to be able to cache that down. You'll see in here that even with OneDrive, we have over 4 gigabytes of data in their OneDrive that they need to have available on that new desktop when they come in, and we make sure that that's staged in the cloud, whether for user docs or also through user profiles. The first time we log off, Profile Unity harvests off the user profile and saves it up to a file share, and that could be in object-based storage with Azure or with Google or with Amazon. And as long as you make the domain available and the user logs in, that same profile can come down through a granular approach. Now we also have in here, as I said, profile disk at work, capturing the large parts of that profile, their cached areas and things like that, so they're going to be productive. You could also use, as I said, FSLogix to do this and have our portability to go across OSs compatible with that. We're logging into a Windows 10 desktop for the very first time. This user has never logged into Windows 10, but their data is staged in the cloud, as we discussed, and Profile Unity runs, and we're pulling that data down, in this case, either from a file server or from object-based storage, and where it has been staged. So the day to go productive has occurred, and Profile Unity runs. It even looks at what applications are available through FlexApp to make those available. No applications are really in this desktop except for Office is delivered in the base image. Look at all the applications that actually also come across, because FlexApp is packaged once, and those applications hitting the desktop, most of those are delivered through FlexApp. And now if we look, even our desktop wallpaper, because it's a corporate standard also in this environment, has stuck. If we look at Foxit Reader, even small things that we have changed in the user profile, like to make the spell checkers available in there, even those small settings have stuck because that's harvested out and brought across Windows operating system versions. Now, FSLogix, our profile disk, can't do this on its own. Let me be very clear. Our portability technology that works with things like Profile Disk and FSLogix is what makes this magic occur from in between Windows operating system versions. And now we've opened up a brand new version of Windows Explorer, and our bookmarks are also present in this environment. And this is what we mean by a zero downtime. You have staged the cloud, the data in the cloud, and made it available to where it has come down at user login, and the user is instantly productive at day one. They have their applications even on their desktop, but even if you distribute those applications differently through published applications and things like that, you can make for a zero downtime user migration over. Now we're opening up a newer version of Office 2016, and the user is logging in, and because we brought this in by profile disk or FSLogix, in either case, the even their large amounts of data are already fully indexed in here. As you see, it's almost as if they never ever logged off or went to a new operating system version. Everything in here is available. Even in OneDrive, their 4 gigabytes of data are made available because we made sure that the settings are in there and they're already logged in with OneDrive, and they're able to see this. So the settings stuck for their login for that. Even their indexing and searching has already occurred, so they could instantly be productive on those desktops. So that's how we we create a zero downtime by doing cloud staging or even staging to a local file share and making sure that users are productive for their new OS on day one. It's both forward compatible and backward compatible with all those operating system versions that you saw in today's matrices earlier. That concludes the demo portion as we talk about as we want to look at questions and start to entertain questions at this time. I'm also going to bring another slide up. We've gotten questions in here we're going to entertain, but we also have a white paper where you can go for more information. You can go to our website, you can go to the community. If you look in the chat window in just a minute, you'll see a link to our white paper, and the white paper will really summarize a lot of these challenges and how you can go about solving them through Liquidware's entire suite of products to make it easier on you than taking a tool-based approach or a cut and paste approach. As we look in here, we've got plenty of time for several questions. You see the white paper link is indeed in here. We also encourage you again to give us shout outs on Twitter. We'll be glad to follow you. We've appreciated the questions that came in so far. Ray Swanson, would you have any other questions that we could entertain at this time?
Sure, I'm just going to go through them. There's a few that kind of combine, so I'll combine a few of them because they're like topics. But here's one. Can profiles be set to remove on sign-off based on device type or device hard drive space?
Yes. The short answer is yes. There's a couple ways to do that. One of them is through our profile cleanup capabilities. It's a feature set in Profile Unity. If you're a current customer, you can see that as an icon in your product. It says clean up the profile at every log off, and there's different ways to clean it up, different degrees to clean it up. You can do it once every 7 days or once every 10 days. If you're on a server-based computing platform like WVD or others, you're keeping a profile with Profile Unity. You're keeping a profile on the local machine, and you're keeping an archive of it with Profile Unity. So you can blow out the local profile at any time and save on a lot of storage space, because where this comes into play a lot of times is with a XenApp server or a WVD server, where a user may never hit that again. They might hit it once a week or once a month, and collectively you have thousands of profiles now saved there, taking up a lot of storage space, and you've got a compressed version of that anyway that's being brought in by Profile Unity, and you can really save and minimize your images that way, or minimize your storage used.
Okay, we've got a few questions here talking about Profile Unity and FlexApp, and asking how those are, if they're part of Profile Unity, do they require separate licenses, stuff such as that. So do you want to touch on that, Jason?
Sure, that's a great question. So in 2011, when we introduced FlexApp to the market, and it has now become a leader in attached applications, we decided that really we needed a distribution engine for applications. We needed to also at times modify or fix up the profile. We needed to also fix up registry keys. We already had that with Profile Unity. The very nature of the way that does, it works so well together. The question about, is it licensed together? Yes. That's why you see the product called Profile Unity with FlexApp. There are ways to license them separate. There's a licensing key that will disable part of the product if that's what you wish to do. So you can discuss that with us. Maybe you already have a UEM solution and you only need application layering. We can do that as well. But you will find that the two products work better together. We would love your user environment management business from AppSense or RES as well. So talk to us about that too, because we can convert you over and you'll have a comprehensive and cohesive solution going forward.
Great, thanks. So this question is about Stratosphere, and they were asking about how do they get that data. I think they were talking about some of the reports that we had, and they asked, do they need to be licensed for Stratosphere and deploy an appliance agent to get that data? But somebody asked, is Stratosphere a separate license as well?
So our products are most cost effectively licensed when you license all three of them together. There's big breaks in there. So if you have a monitoring solution out there, you have a UEM solution out there, you have maybe in the past some kind of application layering solution, you're going to find that by far we are more cost effective when licensing all three together. There's huge breaks in there. Stratosphere is a separate license from Profile Unity and FlexApp. But like I said, there are huge price breaks for bundling them together in our suite known as Liquidware Essentials. To get the data that you saw today out of Stratosphere, some of the easiest ways to do it is to use the search functionality in Stratosphere, and you'll start learning what you know about specific users and specific groups. But you saw an integration with Power BI. It's very easy to do. Jack, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
All right, thanks.
All right, here's a question that gets a little bit more specific. I have an application that is legacy and requires Oracle Client 10.4. Is it possible to migrate to Windows 2016 from 2008 R2 with Liquidware?
Yes. With the application, however, it really depends on if the application itself can be natively installed in the new operating system type. So we're not able to make the application, unfortunately, magically compatible if it was never compatible with 16 to begin with. But as far as migrate, we are going to migrate the user settings, not the application itself. So if you don't have the original media, sorry.
Right. If you had packaged it up with FlexApp, and Jack said if it's compatible with both Windows 7 and 10, usually like in a physical environment, there's a great chance, like a high degree of 90% or better, it's going to work without repackaging it. So you've got that option as well.
Here's another question. How well does this work if you have Outlook cached exchange mode as all, not just a month or year, but shared mailboxes are excluded?
Jack, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. As long as you've got the space, we're going to store it. So I've really never run into that issue before. To me, it's just a volume and space for the OST. How large that would get, your guess is as good as mine. I would imagine, imagine very large.
That's the portion that would be on profile disk or using FSLogix, because that would be too large to bring in with our Hive. But it goes without saying almost, but that's the way we handle those.
All right, we got a few more questions. One person asked, and I'll take this one, can we access the recorded webinar session as there's a network issue in between? Yes, we will be sending out a link to the recording. We posted on our website, but as anyone who registered for this event, we will be sending a link out to the recording, so watch your inboxes for an email from us in about a day that will have a link to that recording. That'll be out there. Other questions. Someone asked, do you have to implement profile disks with Profile Unity?
That's a good question. No, you don't. And oftentimes you may find that Profile Unity's portability piece, which is the first technology we spoke about today, is all you need. Other people that are in VDI environments and such that have a non-persistent desktop, a desktop's reset every time that the user logs in, will definitely find that a profile disk or FSLogix is a big benefit to the Office 365 Outlook experience.
Another point to that, usually when I set up user environments, I like to start with portability first, and then you can always add on a profile disk later. The way to see or treat the profile disks is not necessarily as a replacement for portability, but more as a cache of said profile. So even if you're using an FSLogix container in conjunction with portability rule sets, your portability rule is your profile. The disk is just said cache. So if I have to delete the cache, I still have my profile and settings.
Yep. So a lot of the big use cases to level set us again is our portability is great for a granular managed profile that can go cross OS backwards and forwards. FSLogix and our profile disk are both great for things like email caches or collectively just saving everything in the profile and bringing it right back unmanaged and for one singular operating system version. You can't go between operating system versions largely with a profile disk or FSLogix. But when you run the two together with our portability, that's where you get the best of both worlds.
All right, here's another question. Does this save users data for Chrome and Mozilla Firefox? For example, bookmarks, cookies, stored passwords, etc.
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yes, it will save them in the same native area of the profile that they've always been in. It's not going to make the two compatible with each other unless your user leverages that import functionality that is embedded in those products that can import those.
A lot of challenges around Chrome, especially the recent builds of Chrome, have been the JavaScript cache directory. That thing's a monster of a folder. We've since rewritten the Chrome rule set to not even include that whatsoever, and completely ignore it, so that it doesn't try to pull in 3,000 1K objects, which has been a bit of a problem with a lot of the UEMs and UEVs and all of the profile solutions out there without chasing it down. For any current customers, if you go up on our GitHub site, there actually is a V10 profile format type, and that rule set was baked into our 6.8.3 release that was just released today.
Great. Here's another question. I run a physical desktop environment, but have a VMware Horizon environment for DRBC. Does Profile Unity allow me to migrate between the two? And what type of VDI image should I use? Link clones or something else?
Yeah, they certainly would allow you to go from the physical workstation to the VDI. As far as what kind of workstation type on the Horizon side you want to build, that's completely up to you. If you want to do link clone, insta clone, or persistent workstations, that is up to you and how you want to do that. We support all of them.
Yeah, and you can do that even across OS version. So
Correct.
if the you don't have to make sure they're in sync. Profile Unity, that's the magic we're talking about. We do it every login. The profile remediates itself.
Right.
All right, I think that kind of brings us to a close. There was one last question asking about a copy of the presentation besides the recording. Again, keep an eye on your inbox following the event. Normally within about a day, we'll send out that follow-up. It'll have links not only to the recording, but to some of the assets that we talked about in here, about the white paper and some of the other places that we've referenced you to for more details, plus a link to a copy of the presentation as well. So that'll be a great email for you guys all to get. So with that being said, thank you both Jason and Jack for bringing us through today's presentation. Thanks to all of you for attending and for all the great questions. If at any point in time you have any questions for us, feel free to reach out to us either at the community, community.liquidware.com, which is a great resource for you to reach out with questions, comments, thoughts, and tap into a wide array of experts, or just reach out to us at sales@liquidware.com. So with that being said, thank you everyone and have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.